After 20 years of gardening and 6 years of farming, there's one thing that I'm always gonna grow in my garden, and that is cut flowers. And today I'm gonna share the 15 varieties that I'm most excited to grow this year. First up is Lisianthus. Lisianthus is a flower that I'd never even heard of until I became a flower farmer. But having seen it and having grown it myself over the last few years, it's hard to not want it forever. It's a pretty specialty item. The seeds are really, really tricky to germinate and grow. They grow very, very slowly. It's actually a perennial that, just does not survive at all in my Zone 5 garden. So I need to start it every single year. But because I struggle so much to grow it from seed, I'm not going to. I've actually bought in an entire case of wholesale Lisianthus for myself. Having done it before for the farm, I was pretty familiar with, with how to do it, and just so hard not to have it. So even though I don't need it, I have about 1,000 Lisianthus coming, and I'm not going to plant all of those myself. I am going to be passing them on to some other people. I'm going to be potting them up and then selling them on, but I'm probably going to keep 100 or 200 just for myself, because man, those flowers, it's hard to go back after you have them, and they're such an incredible cut flower. They last 2 to 3 weeks in the vase, and they look like roses. They're one of my favorite things to have in my home, and planting that many out in the garden means that I can have them in a vase in my house, for very, very long seasons. So it just, I had to start with that one because the fact that I did this purchase is a little ridiculous, but it just makes my heart, fills my heart with joy to know that they're coming to me. Number 2 is Zinnias. Zinnias are one of my favorite flowers, and they make a really amazing cut flower. There's just something about the look of them. When a kid draws a flower, just like the idea of a flower, I'm always like, that looks like a zinnia. It's like the perfect platonic conception of a flower. And it comes in so many different colors, and it's so bright, and they're so beautiful. You can't have a cut flower garden without growing zinnias. My favorite variety of zinnia is Bennery's Giant because it has such great disease resistance. It grows these big, beautiful flowers, super productive plants. But I have to admit, if I was only gonna grow one variety of zinnias, which I'm not, I'm gonna grow a bunch of varieties, but if I only was to grow one, the one that I'd be purchasing is the Queeny mix. So these are from the Queen Lime series. It's all the colors, and they're a little bit smaller, but there's something really special about the color mix that they have. There's an orange one. They have these kind of lime tones in the center, and then they fade out. The orange looks quite antique and old-fashioned. There's a pink with lime, and it's kind of like a rose dusty color. There's just a straight up lime. There's a lime blush. Yeah. I love all of them, and honestly, if I could only have one, I'd go for that, and I'd go for the mix so that I get all of them. So definitely, there's gonna be lots of zinnias, but Queeny mix, that's the one. A big thank you to the paid partner of this video, BetterHelp. If you're struggling, consider therapy with BetterHelp. Click betterhelp.com/youcan'teatthegrass for a discount on your first month of therapy. BetterHelp is an online therapy platform that connects people with credentialed therapists. It offers a variety of communication methods, including video calls, voice calls, live chats, and messaging. As many of you know, I've been struggling with my mental health lately. I've had a challenging year, having to completely reinvent my life following a divorce. And as much as obsessing over all the beautiful cut flowers I'm gonna have in the future helps, nothing replaces the support of a real person. And I know that all the work I've done so far is just the beginning. So I really appreciate having a therapist to help me process my feelings, develop tools to help set me up for personal support and success, keep me accountable for progressing, and validate me when I have unavoidable setbacks. I've used BetterHelp in the past. During COVID, it was so challenging to find in-person supports, and BetterHelp was a great solution. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy more comfortable and convenient. And it also has a wide range of therapists available for me, which makes it a lot easier to find a good match. Get matched with a therapist after completing a quick questionnaire. And if you don't like them, it's easy to switch therapists at any time for no extra cost. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. Start fresh any day of the year with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/youcan'teatthegrass and get 10% off your first month of therapy. Number 3 is Statice. And Statice is probably my favorite cut flower out of anything to grow. It's so versatile. The colors are just really amazing. You know, it's got bright yellows and blues and purples and pinks and this amazing apricot. I really love it, and it's fresh and dry. They look almost identical. So they're incredible. You put them in the vase and they kind of just dry in the vase and they don't change their look at all. You know, they're not as focal and showy kind of as the Lisianthus and the Zinnias are. They're kind of this like spray type flower, but you know, I love even just a cluster of them on their own. And they add so much like structure into bouquets and arrangements that as long as I have it, I want to use at least, you know, 4 stems in every bouquet that I ever make. It's going to be hard to limit myself. For the last handful of years, I've really been focusing on growing it over at the farm, and I'd been growing, you know, thousands of plants of it. You know, I just have piles and piles of stems, and with being on a home growing situation, I have to restrain myself a little bit. I can't grow all the colors. I have to, you know, be a little bit more intentional in my color palettes. There was one point that I was like, maybe I'll see if I could find like some farmland that I could rent and I could grow just Statice. A lot of people don't enjoy growing it. It's a little fiddly. So I'm like, oh, I could start a business where I just grow Statice and I sell it to all my flower farming friends. But not this year, but we'll see. We'll see how much I miss having it in my life. But if I had to pick one variety, one seed pack of what I was gonna grow, what I would choose is the Johnny's Pastel mix. It's kind of the perfect ability to get a little bit of everything. And if you grow enough plants, you know, most plants you can pick about 2 stems off of at a time. So, you know, if I was to be having 30 plants, I should have enough that at any given time I'd be able to have enough stems in the same color that I could put together an arrangement for it. If I wasn't gonna go for the mix, if I wanted to go for just one straight up color, then my choice would be QIS Apricot, but there is an apricot in the pastel mix. Number 4 is Snapdragons. I love Snapdragons. They're so, you know, they're just so classic and they're so happy and they're so cheerful. And one of the things that I didn't realize about Snapdragons until I grew them in bulk amounts, you know, you don't realize this necessarily in your home garden, but when you're standing in a field with 1,000 of them in your face, Snapdragons have like just an incredible scent to them. They smell almost like bubble gum. They're really sweet, and you know, it's a little bit more subtle. It's not that like overpowering fragrance that you get from a lot of stuff, but when you bring in just a bunch of Snapdragons into your home, it's enough that like the scent kind of will fill the room, and I never really realized that. On the flower farm, I grew lots and lots of different varieties. I was experimenting with trying to find varieties that could adapt well to the heat. Here in the Okanagan, we have, you know, kind of unique springs. We go from it being quite cold to hot. often in a few weeks we can transition from days kind of being 10 degrees to days being 30 degrees, and that's Celsius. Because of that quick to heat instead of the slow ramp up of spring that most people experience actually causes a lot of plants to kind of bolt and get leggy or flower before they're ready. So it can be tricky with some of these like more spring crops like a Snapdragon is. So I had been experimenting trying to find varieties that still did okay with the heat, and one of the varieties that I really liked was Potomac. It's more of a later spring, early summer blooming variety. You know, so it's not going to bloom as early as some other ones. Earlier blooming variety that I found still did quite well for us was Chantilly. I found it was quite adapted to our weird heat transitions, and it bloomed about a month earlier than the Potomac. But I mean, after having grown the Potomac before, I think like that's probably the one that I'm gonna stick with. And my absolute favorite color in the Potomac series is orange. It's there's lots of Snapdragons that have color names of like bronze, and this is kind of that same color tone where it's orange tones and pink tones, and it has a really nice fade, and it's really incredible for how you can mix it in an arrangement color palette. So highly recommend that variety, and I'm very excited to have it in my garden. Number 5 is Celosia. Celosia is something that I've actually failed to get started for the last couple of years. I've really struggled with growing it here because it needs a lot of heat. So as I was saying, our springs, it goes from cold to hot, but because it's so cold for so long, because I am still zone 5, I am in Canada, I find some of these hotter weather crops suffer a little bit if you do them from transplants and then get them into the ground when the ground is still quite cold. And Celosia is one of those ones. I found that when I grow seedlings for it, transplanted in May, the ground isn't necessarily warm enough to give it really ideal conditions, and then they kind of stay stunted and I never get the good cut flower stems that I want. What I plan on doing for this year is that I'm going to start seedlings for it a little bit later. I'm going to get the seedlings started and then plan to plant them into the garden in more like June instead of May. I'm really excited about some of the different things that I'll be able to grow here in my new space. The farm was, you know, amazing growing conditions, but where I am now is on a different side of the valley than where I was before, and it just gets crazy hot afternoon sun. And so I'm really excited for the potential to grow peppers and tomatoes, but also things like Celosia, which really like that heat. So I think starting it that little bit later, but really getting those overwhelming heat afternoons for a really long season is probably going to make it so that the plants really thrive. Fingers crossed. And maybe I'll get some really amazing Celosia this year. I have a bunch of varieties that I've been experimenting with because I haven't found a favorite yet. But I think the favorite that I've grown so far has been Celway in the terracotta color. I really like kind of the feather, the point shape of it. It's a little bit more petite. And then those kind of brown, copper tones I find are really fun to work with in arrangements. You know, get those like pinks and oranges to go along with that. And because the Celosia needs that heat to kind of be thriving for when it blooms, it's going to be blooming more like August, September. So having those darker tones, you know, it's more fun to play into some of those more fall arrangement colors. So I'm going to definitely be having that one in the garden, as well as like probably a bunch of other colors. Like I am really excited for the potential of Celosia here. Number 6 is Strawflowers. I love Strawflowers. The sound they make when you touch them and the way they dry, they're such a unique flower, and you know, and I love that they dry so well and look so perfect, so that you can make arrangements that carry you through into the winter. You know, that's one of the things that I've really learned to love about about all the dried flower experimenting that I've done over the years. My goal this year is to always have flowers, to always be able to have like an arrangement on my table of fresh flowers, and you know, Canada. So I usually get fresh flowers available here out of the garden until the end of October. But that still leaves November and December and January and February, like a lot of time before I can get, you know, those fresh flowers again. And the dried flowers are kind of really fun for being able to take me through that season. And, you know, I've also experimented with mixing dried flowers along with fresh greenery, right? I can get evergreen greenery in the winter here and, you know, then mix in some of the dried flowers and create some really unique looking arrangements. For this year, I think I'm going to grow some stuff that I will be intentionally drying. Not necessarily with the plan to make just a single bouquet and then have it displayed all winter season long. That's something that I've done for a bunch of years. I usually make a few big decadent arrangements, and then, you know, in my favorite vases, they kind of get popped in for the winter, and then come spring, I throw it in the compost and then go back to the fresh flowers. But I think I'm gonna dry a bunch so that throughout the season I can be updating my arrangements. You know, it'd be fun to be able to make like a Christmas dried flower arrangement and then get rid of it, and make a January dried flower arrangement and then get rid of it, and make myself a Valentine's Day dried arrangement and get rid of it. You know, a huge amount of the value of having cut flowers in my life is the creative element of playing with them. It's putting together those arrangements. And so, you know, dried flowers are a great way to still have that in my life. So, Strawflowers. My absolute favorite color in the Strawflowers is apricot. And, you know, honestly, like, I'm probably happy just growing that. I really enjoy the rose color too, but we'll have to see. Space is limited. I have to do the math. I have my list. I have my list that I'm sharing with you guys. All the seeds that I like am going to prioritize, but we're gonna have to map it out. I'm used to growing 100,000 plants, and I think I can only fit 10,000 in my yard. So I'm gonna be restrained. Serena, you can't grow everything. Number 7 is marigolds. And I love these. So the marigolds that I grow for cut flowers are the giant, the big puff head flowers. And my favorite variety is Coco Gold. I've also grown Coco in the yellow and the orange, but honestly, with the space that I have to restrain myself in. The gold is just a really nice, warm orange. Super good for, you know, using in a variety of things. Another really good variety is Xochi, Xochi, though it's a little bit more tricky to find. I'd been buying that in past years from more like wholesale cut flower sources. But yeah, if you can ever find a seedling of that, those are some amazing marigolds. One of the things that I really like about marigolds too is you get the flowers, which are beautiful and showy, and they often root in vases. The marigold flowers can last like 2 to 3 weeks in the vase, which is really nice. But you can also, they're so big and bulky, these giant African varieties. You know, the bushes, they're quite bulky bushes. And so if you need greenery, they also make a really good summer greenery. I know some people don't like the scent of marigolds, but I do. I like what they smell like, so I'm very happy to have them in my house. You know, they kind of like, to me, they smell really fresh, kind of like tomato leaves. I'm like, it smells like the garden. Number 8 is Ageratum, and the variety that I like is Blue Horizon. So I didn't grow this last year, but I grew it the year before, and I was unsure when I went to grow it if it would get tall enough to be like a really usable cut flower, and it surprised me. They started out like they were quite short, and they got kind of bushy. You know, you plant them kind of in the spring. And I was kind of like, oh, really? This is gonna get cuttable stems? And then it just kind of like, it sent up like from kind of the base of the plant, these quite long and quite usable stems. It's more of like a smaller cluster filler flower, but it's in this beautiful kind of purpley blue tone, and they're really fuzzy. So the texture on them it's just incredible. And then that blue color I find is really nice to kind of mix in with a huge variety of different colors. You know, you put it with pinks and it brings out like the warm purpley tones. You put it with yellows, you know, it kind of cools the whole tone down. So they were really versatile, and each plant produced a lot of stems. You know, and they were pretty compact plants. So it's something that I definitely feel comfortable giving a little bit of space to, knowing that I'm going to get a lot of production out of it. Number 9 is cosmos. You gotta have cosmos. Right? Like, honest, here, you want to do a cut flower garden and you have no space, just like buy a 6-pack of cosmos and you're set. They produce so much, and there's just something like really special about the Cosmo flowers. And if you pick them at the right stage, if you pick them closed, you can get really good vase life on them. I know that I find the Cosmos, when I pick them like at the perfect timing, they get about 10 days for me, and they just go and they go and they go. Often Cosmos will kind of be blooming kind of early summer, which is surprising for like a warm weather loving plant like that. The earliest blooming variety that I've grown is Rubenza, which is just a gorgeous burgundy pink color. Beautiful tones on that. And it just, you know, goes the entire season. I love Double Click. They're fluffy and frilly and fun, and they come in like an amazing mix of colors. I'm definitely gonna want to have some of those in the garden. But I have to admit, if I was only gonna pick one variety of Cosmo, I'd probably go for something really simple, and I'd go for Afternoon White. Even though it's not frilly, even though it's like the really simple structure, the size of the flower, the simplicity of the flower, and also the plant growth, it produces some really good quality stems without the plant kind of overtaking. I find sometimes some of the varieties, like, because these plants, they'll be so big and they'll kind of be flopping over and they'll be clustered, and so it's a little bit challenging to pick good stems if you don't keep really on top of the maintenance of the plants. But Afternoon White kind of does a more traditional, like, sends up stems from the main stalk and will just send up these really good long stems. So, you know, if I was only having one in the home garden, it's probably what I'd go for. Number 10 is a new one for me. It's Delphinium. This is something that I'd been a little bit careful about really investing into on the farm in past years, because it is a perennial. It's kind of expensive to get started, and it's not really a heat lover. It's something that, you know, is gorgeous and beautiful and would love to be grown in an English cottage garden where it stays temperate all summer, but it's not super keen on 100 degrees in the summer. So I've been worried that the delphiniums, if I invested into them, they might only last for a year or two before kind of fizzling out, because they just get so stressed out from the summer heat. But, you know, it's like, if they're in the right spot and they're shaded a little bit, you know, these are not going to be planted in the same spot as the Celosia. These are not going to be planted in it's bacon in the afternoon sun spot. Yeah, but if you can time it right, they're a really amazing cut flower, because you can get 2 cuts off of them. You can get a beautiful showy stem kind of late spring, early summer, and then kind of when it cools down again, it'll send up side stems that are smaller and like will mix quite well into bouquets. So because of that, like, and because they're so gorgeous, I want to experiment with them more. The way that I'm justifying doing it, because you can buy delphiniums, you can buy these gorgeous delphiniums at like the nurseries and then the shopping centers, and they're often kind of like $15, $20 each, but you can actually get some pretty affordable seed on, like, you know, good cut flower variety that, you know, has been around for a really long time, which is Magic Fountain. And I don't think they're that tricky to start. You know, I've been growing perennials as seedlings to kind of grow them in annual systems for a while now, with things like the Rudbeckia and the Feverfew that I've been growing, you know, for filler type flower on the farm. So I am pretty familiar with how to grow this type of seed. So, you know, I'm gonna give it a go. I'm gonna buy a pack of seed. It's not crazy expensive. I'm gonna cold stratify it because I know that's the trick to getting good germination on perennials, and it's simple. You just seed your things and then you stick them outside in the cold for a bit before you bring it back in and germinate it, and then grow them out. You know, if they make it to next year, amazing. But if they don't, I mean, I'm growing annuals. Like I can grow something like this too. So I'm really excited to see how the experiment goes. Number 11 is China Asters, which is another new experiment for me. In the location of my old farm, there was a huge complication of the fact that the farm was full of grasshoppers. Grasshoppers was something I'd never had to deal with before because they just weren't really a major pest in urban center home gardening that I'd done previously. When we moved to the farm, the neighbors beside us had like a big grassy field, and every year a plague of locusts would descend onto the farm, onto the garden. Grasshoppers would come in, eat everything, and that was fine, right? I was like, oh, it's fine, like we can deal with that. But what I realized as I started getting into the flowers is the grasshoppers were carrying a lot of diseases that were spreading to the flowers, and it was causing issues for kind of some of the later blooming varieties. So one of the main diseases that I was really struggling with, which is spread by the grasshoppers, is Aster's yellow disease. And this is something that doesn't only affect asters, but it affects asters so strongly that it's named after affecting asters. And so I always was really reluctant to try any sort of asters, even though they're so gorgeous, they're so beautiful. But because I'm in a new location, you know, a new growing space, it means I'm gonna have different pests. I'm gonna have different things to consider. So it seems like a perfect year to experiment with asters, see if I'm gonna, you know, be dealing with the same kind of disease pressure. And if not, maybe this is a new thing for me to explore, because there's some amazing varieties. I don't want to go too crazy because, as I've said, space is going to be limited. So the variety that I'm going to try out is the Tower series. Number 12 is Icelandic Poppies, and specifically the champagne mix. I've grown these before. They're gorgeous. They're so beautiful. They're an early spring flower that looks like nothing else. And they do come back in zone 5. They're inconsistent. They kind of fizzle out. I don't know if it's because it was a little bit too cold for them here, or if I don't know, they didn't like the heat. There's a lot of things, but beautiful flowers, beautiful plants, and I'm excited to grow them because I'm gonna have some shade. This is something that I think will grow really well in part shade. You know, so it's kind of a perfect opportunity for me to take advantage of the fact that I've not had any shade over the farm for years and years, and be able to try out some of these like cut flowers that kind of just, you know, disappeared off of the list because there was things that grew better in the conditions that I have. You know, I'm really excited to learn my new growing space, and experimenting with stuff like this is a great way to do it. Number 13 is one of my favorites from the farm, and it's Fama Scabiosa. So this is a perennial. It comes back, you know, I planted the first patch of it 4 years ago, and it came back consistently, though I heard it is a variety that kind of will like eventually fizzle out and fade. It's not the type of thing that's going to clump up and then you divide it as other perennials are, but worth it. The flowers on it are incredible. I've grown like the annual Scabiosa before, and it was really fussy and really difficult to pick. It kind of had a similar growth pattern to bachelor buttons. It kind of was just like, wow, like big, open, floppy, weedy thing. And, you know, I just didn't have the patience to pick it for these kind of smaller flowers that you got off of it. So the Fama Scabiosa creates these big formal flowers, and it comes in a blue and a white, and I actually have seed on hand for it. So I'm gonna start some up in the spring, and I'm really excited to get a handful of them kind of established into the yard to hopefully come back for year after year, because they're beautiful. They're super beautiful. Number 14 is something that I've tried to grow for the farm every year that I've had the farm, and I've just never gotten around to it, and that's ornamental kale. The reason why I always wanted to do it is because it's such an amazing late season flower. The trick to growing it, like you could plant it in the spring and then get it, but then it would bloom kind of in August, and there's so many better things in August than ornamental kale. So it's like, ugh, like why bother? Why give it the space? But the thing that's amazing about what you can do with it, especially when your space is limited, is you can start it and plant it into the garden more like in end of June, beginning of July, and you can grow it and then be harvesting it like after frost. So you can actually pull out spring crops, replace it with this ornamental kale, so you still have something filled in and you can extend your flower season. The ornamental kales are like amazing vase life on them too, but they're the type of thing that if I got really good at growing it, you know, I could be going and picking them out of the garden some years in December and being able to put together kind of like these Christmas arrangements based all around the ornamental kales, and they come in just some really, really incredible different looks. And you know, I'm ready to learn how to do it. The variety that I have to grow this year is Crane series. You know, I don't want to go too intensive on it because they do take up a lot of space. They are kind of like a kale plant. They will kind of take a single square foot each. So, you know, I want to experiment with it. I want to see like what I can do, and then if I'm successful this year, it's something that I could see myself giving more space to as years go on. And then finally, number 15 is one of my favorite things to grow, and that is Ammobium, or winged everlasting. It grows really, really similar to Statice. The plants are kind of like these same low flat things that send up the wiry stems, dries really easily, but it looks like this kind of feverfew mini Strawflower in like white with like dark centered eyes. And I love it. It's beautiful. It's one of those ones where I could happily just have a bunch of it, and the tiny little cluster flowers just make me so happy. You know, it's like the Statice. I love growing it. If I ever get my Statice farm, I would be also growing winged everlasting in my Statice farm. Grow a few thousand plants of it. But yeah, I just couldn't be without it. So, you know, I look at my list and I'm like, oh, like it was really hard for me to narrow this down to like 15. I was like, I'm gonna pick the 10 best things, and then I was like, no, there's so many good things, I can't narrow it to 10. 15 is the best. But the list of flowers that I'm wanting to grow for next year is a lot longer than this. You know, I probably do have over 1,000 square feet that I can devote to just cut flowers. I already have some like perennials planted in. I already have like feverfews and salvias, you know, some bee balms. I have stuff already established into my garden. So, you know, I'm gonna have to control myself. But one of the incredible things that I learned from farming is you can really get away with not using that much space for growing a lot of these things, and especially cut flowers. What happens with cut flowers is when you grow them in like really tight against each other, it just encourages them to send up even longer stems, which don't look great in like a landscaping type setting. Stuff looks a lot better when it's not like leggy and spindly. But when you're going to cut it, you know, having those leggy, spindly like stems are kind of ideal anyways, and they all kind of self-support each other. So I'm really excited. My plan for what my cut flower garden is gonna be will be kind of like more of like an English cottage garden type space. It'll be filled in with like a whole mix of stuff, and it'll kind of be like wild and unruly, and then I can like go out there like a jungle and I can pick all my favorites and put together these arrangements. So I can't wait to, you know, be starting to grow some of these things, to be starting to be able to like get out into the actual garden, not being inside, just talking about gardening, but actually getting out there. Can't wait to get closer to that time and share all of this with you guys. But hopefully this will inspire you for maybe a few more seed selections to get on that list before seed shopping season is over. And everything that I like listed here is available at Johnny's Seeds. So, you know, nice and easy to actually be able to source these.